The story begins in a quiet corner of the city, an old townhouse that smelled faintly of coffee and rain. I'd been living there for 6 months, renting the small attic room from Clara, a 40-year-old woman who carried herself with the quiet grace of someone who had learned to live alone without becoming lonely. Her laughter was soft, her words careful, and her presence grounding. That evening, the light outside had dimmed into that golden hour that makes everything feel temporary and fragile. I stood in the doorway of her kitchen, the rent envelope crumpled slightly in my hand. My job had been cut down a part-time, and my savings were thinner than pride would allow me to admit. I had come down to tell her I need a few extra days, maybe a week, but when I saw her, the words caught in my throat. She was standing by the window, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a mug of tea in her hand. Her black hair was tied loosely, strands slipping forward and brushing her cheeks. The scent of cinnamon drifted from the cup, mixing with the faint vanilla candle burning on the counter. When she turned toward me, her expression wasn't one of irritation or disappointment, just quiet concern. "You look worried," she said gently, setting the cup aside. "Is everything all right?" I tried to find the right words, but all that came out was a clumsy truth. "I might be a little short this month, just until the next paycheck. I'll get it to you, I promise." She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, really looked, as if she could read the exhaustion hiding behind my attempt at composure. Then she smiled, faintly but warmly, and said the sentence that would echo in my head long after that night. "Forget the rent tonight." For a moment, I didn't move. The words felt too kind, too undeserved. "I can't just," I started, but she cut me off softly. "It's fine," she said. "You've been a good tenant. You help out when you can. Consider it a favor, or maybe just a quiet night of peace owed to both of us." The silence between us thickened, not awkward, but charged with something unspoken. Gratitude, curiosity, maybe a hint of longing neither of us wanted to name. I nodded slowly. "Then at least let me do something in return." Her eyes met mine, dark brown, reflective, steady. "Like what?" I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I couldn't walk away owing her more than money. Maybe I could fix the leaky faucet, make dinner, or simply keep her company for a while. Anything that would make her smile again, the kind of smile that reached her eyes. That night, for the first time, I stopped seeing her as just my landlady. She was something else, someone whose kindness carried a quiet ache, and I promised myself I wouldn't forget it. The next evening, the house was quiet except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wooden floors. I stood in the kitchen with rolled-up sleeves, a chopping board in front of me, and the faint hope that a simple meal might balance the invisible debt I felt pressing on me. Clara hadn't asked me to cook. In fact, she'd probably have waved it off with her usual modest smile if I'd told her. But I needed to do something, not just to repay her kindness, but to feel useful, grounded. Gratitude has a strange weight when it's mixed with admiration. I was halfway through slicing peppers when I heard her footsteps behind me. Soft, unhurried, like someone who wasn't trying to surprise, but didn't want to intrude either. "You're full of surprises," she said, amusement threading through her voice. I turned around. She stood at the kitchen doorway, wearing a simple beige sweater and dark jeans. Casual, but somehow she made it look elegant. Her black hair fell loosely around her shoulders, catching the golden kitchen light. "I thought you might be hungry," I replied, trying to sound casual as I stirred the sauce. "Consider it my other way of paying rent." That made her laugh, a sound that felt like warmth spreading through the room. "I see. And what's on the menu, chef?" "Nothing fancy," I said. "Just pasta, maybe some roasted vegetables. Something easy to share." She leaned against the counter beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her arm. She reached for a tomato slice, tasted it, and smiled. "You're better at this than you admit." The scent of herbs filled the air, thyme, basil, and the faint tang of garlic sizzling in olive oil. As we moved around each other in the narrow kitchen, our shoulders brushed occasionally, brief, electric moments that neither of us mentioned but both of us felt. When the food was ready, we sat across from each other at the small dining table. The candle I'd lit flickered between us, casting soft light over her face. There was something different in her expression, not guarded, but open, as though she was letting herself be seen. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, her voice quieter now. "I know," I replied, "but I wanted to. I owed you at least this much." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment before she said, almost to herself, "Sometimes kindness doesn't need to be repaid. It just needs to be shared." We ate in comfortable silence after that, punctuated by small laughter and the clink of forks. The city outside seemed far away. There was only the gentle rhythm of two people learning the shape of each other's company. When dinner ended, she offered to wash the dishes, but I stopped her gently. "Let me. You've done enough." As she watched me from the doorway, arms loosely crossed, her gaze softened. It wasn't about rent anymore, and I think we both knew it. The rain started not long after midnight, a soft, steady rhythm tapping against the window panes, filling the old townhouse with a quiet, reflective mood. I couldn't sleep. Maybe it was the sound of the storm, or maybe it was the memory of Clara's laughter from dinner, still echoing faintly in my head. I sat on the small couch in the living room, a cup of tea cooling in my hands, staring out at the street below. The lamplight shimmered on the wet pavement, golden and blurry. The kind of night that makes you think too much. I heard the light tread of her feet before I saw her. She appeared at the bottom of the staircase, wrapped in a soft gray robe, her hair loose and slightly damp from washing. She looked surprised to see me awake. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, her voice hushed, gentle against the backdrop of rain. I shook my head with a small smile. "Guess not. The sound of rain usually helps, but tonight it's just loud." She smiled faintly, then crossed the room and sat across from me. The robe fell loosely around her frame, her posture relaxed yet composed. She tucked one leg under the other, her fingers curling around a mug she'd brought with her. "It's funny," she said after a moment. "When I was younger, I loved nights like this. But lately, they just make me feel alone." That honesty caught me off guard. Not because it was sad, but because it was real. I watched her stare into the rain-smeared window, her reflection blurred by the light. "You're not alone tonight," I said quietly. She looked at me then, not with pity, not with maternal warmth, but something deeper. Understanding. Connection. The kind of look that says, "Asterisk, I hear you. I see you." Asterisk, we talked for a while about small things at first, books she loved, places she missed, the way time seems to run faster after 40. She laughed softly at her own admission, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her movements were unhurried, graceful, like someone used to carrying herself carefully through the world. At one point, the wind blew against the windows, making the frame rattle. She flinched slightly, and without thinking, I reached out. My hand brushed against hers. Warm, steady. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand slightly, her thumb resting lightly over mine. The silence that followed wasn't awkward or charged. It was safe. Like two people finding comfort in the simplest human connection. "Thank you," she said quietly, eyes still on the rain. "For what?" "For staying up. For being kind. For not making me feel old." I didn't know how to answer, so I just gave her hand a small squeeze, the kind that says, "Asterisk, you're not old. You're still seen." Asterisk outside. The rain softened, but neither of us moved. The night had turned into something fragile and beautiful, a pause between two lives quietly drawing closer together. The morning after the rain felt strangely different, brighter, lighter, as though the world itself had taken a deep breath. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, falling across the old wooden floor in gentle streaks. I woke up later than usual, half expecting the quiet of an empty house, but the faint sound of humming drew me downstairs. Clara was in the kitchen. The smell of coffee and warm toast filled the air. She stood by the counter, hair tied loosely, wearing a light blue blouse and soft cream trousers. There was something effortlessly graceful about her, like someone who didn't need attention to draw it. "Morning," I said, my voice still heavy with sleep. She turned, smiling. "Morning. I made coffee. You look like you could use it. After last night?" "Definitely." I tried to sound casual, but my words came out softer than I intended. There was still a trace of that quiet connection between us, the kind that lingers after a long conversation that meant more than either person admits. She handed me a mug, her fingers brushing mine in the exchange. The brief touch was enough to make the world narrow to the space between us. I caught her scent, a mix of coffee and faint perfume, like jasmine carried on morning air. We sat opposite each other at the small table, the sunlight turning her black hair almost brown in places. She looked relaxed, but her eyes, those deep, steady eyes, had a glimmer of thought behind them. "You're up early," I said, just to fill the silence. She gave a small laugh. "Habit. The older you get, the less sleep you seem to need. Besides, mornings are quiet. They give you time to think." "What about?" She hesitated, turning the mug in her hands. "About life, mostly. How quickly things change. How people drift in and out. Sometimes I wonder if I've built too much of my life around being careful." Her words hung there, open and honest. It wasn't just self-reflection. It was an invitation. "I don't think being careful is bad," I said slowly. "It just means you've learned what can hurt. But maybe it's okay to trust a little again." She looked at me then, and I saw something shift in her. Not in her expression, but in her posture, in the way her lips softened slightly, as if she was holding back a smile. "Maybe," she murmured. A moment later, she reached forward and brushed a crumb off my shirt sleeve. It was such a small gesture, light, almost absent-minded, but it left a warmth that spread through me like sunlight after rain. We spent the rest of the morning moving through quiet conversation. Laughter over burnt toast, the gentle clatter of dishes, the kind of peace that feels like it doesn't belong to ordinary life. By the time I left for work, she stood at the door, coffee in hand, her smile easy but her eyes unreadable. Something was changing between us, and neither of us seemed ready to stop it. The days that followed moved with a quiet rhythm, shared smiles in passing, brief conversations that lingered a little too long. It was as if that rainy night had left a soft echo between us, something we both heard but didn't speak about. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. The sky was still faintly gold, and the air smelled of cut grass from the neighbor's yard. I noticed Clara standing on a small step stool near the hallway shelf, trying to reach a box. Her robe sleeves slipped down her arms as she stretched. I could hear the faint sound of her sigh when the box refused to budge. "Need help?" I asked, setting my bag down. She turned, slightly startled but smiling. "You're early. I didn't hear you come in. Guess I'm quiet when I'm not tripping over my own shoes." I grinned, stepping closer. "Here, let me." She moved aside, her hand brushing lightly against my arm as I reached up to take the box down. The contact was brief, a whisper of warmth, but it left a pulse in my chest that refused to fade. "Thank you," she said softly, taking the box and placing it on the table. "I was just sorting some old things. Trying to declutter, I guess." The box was filled with old photographs, letters, and tiny mementos, pieces of a life well lived and maybe quietly missed. She picked up one photo, smiling wistfully. "This was my first apartment after college. I thought I knew everything back then." I leaned against the counter, studying the photo, a younger version of her, bright-eyed and laughing. "You still look like that," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes flicked up to mine, surprised but not offended. "Just searching." "You're kind," she said, her voice soft. "Flattery suits you." I shrugged, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. It wasn't flattery. Something in the air shifted then, subtle but undeniable. She turned away, gently setting the photo down. "I've been meaning to ask," she said after a moment. "Could you take a look at the garden lights out back? They've been flickering lately, and I keep forgetting to call someone." "Of course," I said. "I'll handle it tomorrow." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added quietly, "You really don't have to do all this." "I know," I replied. "But maybe I just want to." She looked at me, really looked, and I could see the faintest shimmer of emotion behind her calm expression. "You remind me of something I used to feel," she said almost to herself. "What's that?" I asked gently. "Hope," she whispered. The word hung between us like the last ray of daylight. I didn't answer, didn't need to. Instead, I reached for the box, helped her sort the last few photos, and listened as the evening deepened into a quiet, unspoken understanding. one that no longer needed excuses. The next day, the air was heavy with the scent of jasmine and freshly watered soil. The little backyard garden behind Clara's townhouse was small but beautiful. Rows of roses, herbs, and the soft glow of string lights weaving through the wooden fence. I crouched near the switch box, a screwdriver in hand, trying to figure out why the lights kept flickering. Clara stood nearby, holding a small watering can. Her robe sleeves rolled to her elbows. The evening light caught the edges of her black hair, turning it a deep bronze under the setting sun. She wasn't saying much, just watching quietly with that calm patience she carried everywhere she went. "Looks like it's just a loose wire," I said, tightening the screw. "Nothing serious." "Good," she replied softly, her tone relieved. I was worried I'd have to replace them. These lights were a gift. "From who?" I asked, glancing up. She smiled faintly. "A friend. Years ago." Then she laughed, shaking her head. "He said they made the garden feel less lonely." I didn't believe him at the time, but maybe he was right. The lights flickered once, then bloomed steadily, washing the garden in warm golden glow. She set the watering can aside and stepped closer, admiring them. "You fixed it," she said, a quiet warmth in her voice. "Yes, I did," I replied. We stood there for a moment, not saying much, just taking the scene. The garden looked alive again, every petal and leaf touched by soft amber light. She turned toward me, her eyes reflecting that same glow. "Would you like some tea?" she asked finally. "I'd love some." We sat on the wooden bench beneath the trellis, mugs in hand. The tea was faintly sweet with a hint of mint. Fireflies drifted lazily between the flowers, and the world felt far away, as if time had chosen to pause just for us. "You've changed the house," she said quietly after a while. "It used to feel too quiet. Now it feels like someone's living in it again." "I could say the same," I replied. "You've changed it for me too." Her lips curved into a soft, almost shy smile. "You're too young to say things like that with so much meaning." "Maybe," I said, "but I mean them anyway." For a long moment, neither of us looked away. The glow of the garden lights reflected in her eyes, and in that silence, something gentle unfolded, a kind of affection that didn't need to be spoken aloud. She reached out, brushing a bit of dirt from my hand where I'd been working. Her fingers lingered just slightly. "You've got a bit of the garden on you," she said with a quiet laugh. "Then maybe I'll keep it," I said, half joking. Her laughter softened, then faded into a silence that felt almost tender. She looked away, but I could see the faintest hint of color rise to her cheeks. That night, as I headed back upstairs, I glanced out the window. The garden lights glowed steadily, just like the feeling she'd left in my chest. Something small, bright, and impossible to ignore. A week passed quietly after that night in the garden, but something between us had changed, not in words, but in rhythm. Our mornings carried an ease that hadn't been there before. Shared coffee, soft laughter, small talks that seemed to stretch longer each day. It wasn't about rent anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. One Saturday afternoon, I found her in the living room sorting through the same box of old things. The window was open, the curtains swaying lightly in the breeze. Sunlight poured across the floor, painting everything in gold. She looked up when I entered. "You're back early. I figured you'd need help with these again." Her smile deepened. "You're making a habit of rescuing me from my own nostalgia." "Someone has to," I teased, sitting down across from her. I picked up a photo from the pile, her at a small beach cafe, hair tousled by wind, eyes bright with laughter. "You look happy here." "I was," she said, taking the photo gently from my hand. "I thought that version of me was gone for good. But lately," she paused, her thumb brushing the edge of the picture. "I think she's coming back." There was a long, quiet stillness after that. The air between us felt heavier, not tense, but full, like the world was holding its breath. "Clara," I said softly, "you make this place feel like home." She looked up, eyes meeting mine, searching, maybe even afraid of what she'd find there. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it because I have to." Her lips parted slightly, as though she might speak, but no words came. Instead, She set the photo aside and reached over, her hand resting lightly on my arm. It was a simple touch, warm, steady, but it carried everything we hadn't said. Gratitude, care, maybe something deeper. "You've been good to me," she said finally, her voice low. "I didn't expect to care this much." "You're not alone in that," I admitted. Her hand tightened briefly on my sleeve. Then she withdrew it, glancing toward the open window. "People talk, you know. They always do." "I don't care," I said gently. "I just care about you." For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she stood, crossing to the window, looking out at the garden. "You shouldn't make promises you can't keep," she murmured. I rose and joined her. The sunlight framed her face, highlighting the faint laugh lines near her eyes. Traces of years, of stories, of strength. "I don't make promises," I said quietly. "I just tell the truth." She turned toward me then, and for a second, the distance closed, not with words, not with touch, but with something softer. Understanding. Respect. The quiet acceptance that what we shared didn't need to be labeled to be real. That evening, I helped her pack away the last of the old photographs. When she thanked me, her smile was small but certain. And as I left the room, I realized something. The rent had been forgotten long ago. What stayed behind wasn't debt or favor, but something rarer, the kind of connection that asks for nothing, yet gives everything in return.